go ahead and take it away.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ben. I'm an alcoholic, and I have been led through this process with the help of God and a Big Book Step Study sponsor. I've completed my amends to the best of my ability and try to practice steps 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis. Good to be with you. This is my first time here, and thank you for sharing, Eric, and everybody else who's made this meeting possible. Um, A tornado is a lot like an alcoholic. I got a kick out of hearing that. And yeah, yeah. I was a kind of a very quiet tornado, I think. And I tried to keep secret uh, my defects, tried to hide them. I was to discover that this was a core part of my alcoholism, that I was leading a double life. And when I came in, I kind of had the feeling when I approached my sponsor, we took the third step that I was turning myself in and that there had been a warrant out for my arrest for many years. And finally, we would get to the truth. Uh, and that scared the shit out of me. um, I was very, very apprehensive, and yet I had been coming long enough to meetings to have identified as an alcoholic and to have seen that there were people in these meetings, particularly the Big Book Step Study meetings, that had had a profound change in their life and the way they thought, the way they behaved. They were willing to be unselfish and give of themselves. My sponsor happened to be one of them. And when we did do the third step, he did emphasize that he'd help me and that I should be willing to go to any lengths to um, have victory over this disease of alcoholism. And at that point, uh, I had been not drinking. I had been sober maybe for 5 months, not drinking for a year, and was pretty beaten up and pretty willing and teachable at that point. But I didn't really know if for the first time in life I could really be honest about um, the harm that I had done to myself and others, which is what this steps 8 and 9 are addressing primarily. And so we did the inventory, we did the fourth step inventory. And in the course of that, I began to uh, see myself more clearly. The inventory shed light on my defects of character, um, particularly in doing the turnarounds and the sex conduct, and certainly the fears. I could see my part, how I had um, stepped on the toes of others and how they had retaliated. Uh, I could see more clearly how I had used other people. And when I did the fifth step and all of that came out pretty much, you know, in a in a very flowing way, I began to really understand the damage that it had done to me leading a double life. Um, so I wanted to, at that point, in doing steps 6 and 7, I became willing, to live differently, to turn my will and my life over, really. And I was told that there would be more work to do to clear away the wreckage of the past. So my sponsor at that point, having completed 4 and 5 and then 6 and 7, he said, get another notebook and go through your inventory, uh, find the names of people that you had harmed and write them down. And he suggested that I break them into categories, um, living or deceased, people who live nearby me, co-workers, family, uh, people that I, owed money to, institutions, perhaps that I had cheated or not given my best to, etc. And I went through my inventory, and that included my sex conduct. And there were names in the sex conduct that were not the primary names. There were other people as well, such as family members and friends of those people who I had harmed. And I wrote them down. I wrote them all down. And he emphasized that it was important, as it says in this reading, that we become willing to make amends to them all. Step 8 was not just making the list, it was becoming willing. And he suggested that I approach this as a spiritual exercise and pray that I be given guidance as I went over these names to know who I should approach and who I should not, where I might cause further harm or where I was not ready, where I was not yet willing. He was emphasizing that it was terribly important that it would not be good for me to go out and approach somebody that I still resented. So this required, some prayer. It required some talk with my sponsor at times, when I wasn't sure how to make that approach. Should I go directly? Should I make a phone call? Should I write a letter? Or should I simply hold off on making amends? Um, and I found it helpful having done a thorough inventory. I could go back and I could see at least how, in a rough way, I had ascertained what harm I had done, what harm I might have done um, with this person. He also suggested that I not go to people uh, that where there had been a highly charged, at least not immediately go where there had been, an intense sexual relationship. Maybe shouldn't go, somewhere where I had been fired, and so forth, and to hold off and do the easier ones first, maybe some closer friends, maybe some co-workers, and generally people that were, still easy to get in touch with. And he suggested that I do at least a couple amends a week. And I tried to stick to that. Uh, he said, this is an urgent errand. I'll help with this with you, but this is really you and your higher power now. Your relationship with God that you developed over time. You've had a spiritual experience, in the 4th and 5th step, and you have developed a relationship. And now you can really put your life into God's hands as you go out. So I really found it useful to follow the directions of my sponsor as well as what it says in this book. His faults are not discussed, we stick to our own. He suggested that I not only go out and, confess my wrongdoing um, and apologize for it, but also make a statement about how I would change my behavior in the future. He also mentioned it would be good to allow the other person to have some time to respond. So that was helpful. I did one. I had a mechanic that I had gone to for several years, and they'd serviced my car pretty faithfully. I had an old Datsun shit box. They had welded on the gas tank, uh, and at one point, and another point, the car had gotten totaled, and they had put it in their yard for a week or two before I could get it worked on, and they didn't charge me for that. But when it came to doing another job on the car, um, and they made a mistake, and um, they had split my spark plugs and charged me for that. I objected and found that it was a grave injustice, and insisted that they should pay for all of it, and they insisted that I should pay for half of it. Um, not being a mechanic, I didn't know what the hell I was talking about at the time, but I just felt I should get my way. So this was one where, it says you should be prepared for them to throw you out of their office. And as I came and it was just a couple blocks walk, so I walked there, and I I could see the expression on his face when I walked in. And he was not at all pleased to see me. And I said, I'm here to apologize, for what happened. And I explained to him, how I had a change of heart and mind, and could see now, you know, how good they had been to me, and how wrong I had been, in my assessment of their work. And as he was listening, he kind of motioned in. There were a couple other guys in the garage that he motioned in to come in, and they listened too. And I was really terrified when I went there. I was really afraid, especially when I saw him. But as soon as I started speaking the truth about as I had understood it, the fear left me. And that was a tremendous spiritual experience. It says we should put the outcome in God's hands. And I really felt that, God, or my higher power, whatever you want to call that, presence of truth and love um, was with me and was speaking through me and helping me, and that I was not alone. Um, and of course, when I had finished, he gave me a piece of his mind. And he was not at all, he had not just completed a fourth and fifth step. He was not at all prepared just to hear the apology and say, pat me on the back and you're a good guy and God bless you. And no, he said, that's fine. I'm glad to hear that, but I never want you to come back. We don't want your service anymore. So I left there, and I took it all in, and I lived at the time in Boston near a park, and I just went walking through that park, feeling lightened. I felt lightened. I felt like I'd done what I had to do, what I could do, and that was a that was a positive early experience for me. Another early one, which happened, as I said, my sponsor had counseled me to not, go to people I'd been in a relationship with, and I didn't. I made the mistake of doing that not long after I had started doing my amends to somebody that I had been in a loving relationship with, and it had ended, and I didn't really fully acknowledge it at the time, but I wanted, when I went to see her again, I wanted to reclaim that relationship and have it rekindled. And that didn't happen. She listened, and she didn't say that much. She was very kind and very understanding. And she says, hold on a second, I have some things I have for you. And she went and she got the color TV that I had given her, and some I think kitchenware, that she had acquired over the years. And she said, I just this was unfinished. I've been hanging on to this, and I'm really, really glad to really let go now. And so I left there feeling pretty sad and pretty heartbroken. And I went to a meeting that night, and there was a old timer there. And I told him what had happened, and he smiled and he said, making an amends is really about, seeking the best possible relationship. And that helped me a lot, as a guideline. It doesn't say that in the book, but he was an old time AA man, and that helped me a lot to put that in perspective. So I waited a while before I went to anyone in my family. Um, it became clear to me that I had resentments toward people in my family, toward my brother and my sisters, uh, who were much more, well, I'm not affluent, I never was, but they were affluent. They were pretty well off in the world, and I was kind of the black sheep in some ways. And I allowed myself to let them, I let them pay my way for things, pick up the tab, here's a check for your plane fare, and that kind of thing. And I saw how that had really enabled those resentments to grow over the years. And I resolved that I wasn't going to continue to do that. So that was a big part of my amends. The other part was uh, I withdrew. And this was true for a lot of my relationships. I withdrew. Um, I became silent. I didn't show up. Um, yeah, they had their get-togethers, and I wasn't there. And I wasn't honest about how I was suffering in my alcoholism. I tried to hide that, and I tried to keep that a secret. And the way I'd been living my life, I tried to keep that a secret from them. So a big part of my amends in talking with my brother and my sisters initially was to talk about my alcoholism and to explain to them um, how it was, and how I'd suffered, and why I had withdrawn, and how I wanted to change. And I remember my brother, when he listened, he said, well, that's a good beginning. We'll see how this goes. And yeah, this was almost 30 years ago. It's not stopped. This is one of those continuing amends, as it says in the book. There's a long period of reconstruction for some of these relationships. And so it goes on, and it's not always easy to be loving and kind and tolerant with family. But this is something that I try to do today. I'm not sure where I am in my time, Eric. Am I good for another 5 minutes or so?
Yeah, definitely 5 to 10.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Um, yeah. Um, I'll just talk about one more amends, which was especially instructive to me. Um, at the time, I was living in Boston in a triple decker. I lived on the top floor. I had a neighbor on the bottom floor who was a single mother and who hung out with people involved in drugs, and some of them appeared to be gang members. Some of them came around with Rottweilers and put them in the basement and surprised me when I went down to the washer and dryer. Uh, Surprised by Rottweilers. Played loud music, and we didn't get along. And there was a couple occasions I called the police, to have them, bring, when they wouldn't, turn off the music, turn it down. So we had a frosty relationship for a number of years, and I knew that this was somebody I had to in some way change my relationship with, but I didn't know, how to do that. And so in this case, I did pray very much, for guidance. And what I was instructed to do through my higher power was I needed to pray for the well-being of this woman and to picture her suffering and to have compassion for her suffering. And I also needed to be willing to let go of my resentment towards her. And that took a while. It took a number of years. What I found happened was, instead of making a direct amends, at that time I was taking the T to work in the morning, and she would drive her car to work. But for some reason, one morning, when I got into the car on the T, there she was, sitting across from me. And I didn't say anything, and she didn't say anything. But it happened again. There was like a couple mornings that week. I guess she had lost the use of her car or something. But anyway, not long after that, um, there was a car fire on our street. And I had seen the glow of the fire, and I went down to the first floor, and she came out to the back entrance, and we were both looking through the window at the same time at this car that was on fire. And the car actually started moving across the street, which is sometimes can happen with a car when it catches fire. And that was odd too, and it caused us to have a little conversation about this car and what might happen, and did anybody call the police. And then the last thing that happened was, one night I went down to get some laundry, move some laundry into the dryer, and she was coming up the stairs. And by this time, I had been praying for her for a while. And we looked at each other, and I said to her, "How are you doing?" And she said, "Not good. My child is sick." And I said, "I'm really sorry to hear that. I hope he gets better." And that was it. And from that point on, the relationship changed. And I don't know, I didn't do that. And I know that there have been other, relationships, other people that were on my list that I had encountered after that, that I would meet up with them. And I didn't have the resentment. I wasn't carrying the resentment. I had made a spiritual amends, and they sensed that. They could feel that. They could sense the change that had occurred. I finally did, before I left, apologize for my part to her. But it was really, I think, the work of that loving presence, loving spiritual presence that had moved me, and perhaps her, toward that place of peace. Anyway, it's a great process. I don't know where some of you might be in it. If you're considering it, um, if you're writing or maybe just starting to make amends, yeah, keep on with it. And I know it's given me a lot of peace. They talk about looking the world in the eye. I used to I had grudges against about 5 different copy shops. And I remember, it was kind of like being in a poisoned monopoly board where you couldn't go here, you couldn't go there. You'd had a bad, undoing with one or the other. And so I don't live that way anymore. Fortunately, I don't have to cross the street when I see somebody that I don't like. Uh, I try to be loving and tolerant as much as I can. And that gives me a lot more peace of mind today. So thanks for listening. Good to be with you, and I'll pass now. Thank you.